Hello, everybody. My name is Bonaventura Maiolo. People call me Bino because it's much simpler and easier than Bonaventura. And I'm an associate professor here in the School of Psychology at the University of Lincoln. And I'm going to talk to you about evolutionary roots of cooperation, prejudice, and aggression. So when we talk about cooperation and aggression, competition, these are core aspects of our societies. Humans are always balancing themselves between friendly, pro-social acts and competitive and aggressive acts. And when we look at human societies across historic times or different cultures, we notice that peaceful interactions or pro-social interactions, so interactions that favor friendly exchanges, social exchanges between individuals and groups are very common in human societies. We cooperate not just with kin, but also with sometimes with complete strangers. But at the same time, aggression, warfare, and lethal violence are common, again, across historic times and across cultures. So there has been always a lot of debate and attention from researchers and philosophers about whether humans are naturally pro-social, cooperative, or violent. And there are a number of open questions in relation to cooperation and aggression, and I'm trying in this talk to focus on a couple. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, is whether we can consider cooperative and aggressive behaviors as two opposite types of social interactions, so that we can categorize individuals on the basis of what they do and how they behave towards other individuals, whether they are cooperative or aggressive, or whether cooperation and aggressions are connected, and we can display these two extremely different types of social interactions, sometimes even simultaneously, but directed at different individuals. And another very important question, especially from an evolutionary point of view, is whether our tendency to be aggressive towards other humans is unique, or whether some similar levels of violence are observed in our closest relatives, in other animal species that are closest to us. So I'll focus on the first question first. And as I said, whether humans are good or evil has been a question that has been addressed and has been received a lot of attention by philosophers and scientists for centuries. There are traditionally two different opposing views of human nature. One which links to Hobbes and later to Tennyson, that focus on the aggressive nature of humans, the fact that we are naturally inclined to be violent, and only with culture and complex societies we learn to act peacefully towards one another. And the other view that was erroneously considered to be sparked by the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau sees humans as naturally peaceful and only becoming violent because of the complexity and inequality that we observe in modern human society. So you can see that these two approaches or explanations of human nature are quite in contrast with one another. It's going into so are humans good or evil? I think it depends on the identity of the individuals with whom we interact. So the key aspect in determining, or one of the key aspects in determining whether we act prosocially or aggressively, is whether we consider other individuals as similar to ourselves or different from ourselves. And this is what social categorization does. It allows us, in very simple ways, to categorize and group individuals on the basis of ethnicity, sex, religion, language, and other factors like what clothes they wear and so on, to identify individuals that are more similar to us and so more likely to act friendly if we are friendly ourselves, versus individuals that are different from us, and we might potentially consider them as a potential threat. The reason for why this is happening, I'll explain in a moment. This type of social categorization is captured very well by Kipling, who says all the people like us are we, and all the people not like us are they. Why do we categorize? Categorization and social categorization is very important and has very beneficial effect on our social lives. It allows us to differentiate caregivers from non-caregivers when we are only a few weeks and months old. It allows later in life to differentiate between friends and foes and make social choices that are beneficial for us. But it can also lead to prejudice, and prejudice can transform itself in its extreme forms into the dehumanization of individuals that are different from us. If you are interested in this type of social categorization, you can use the link here, which will give you access to a number of different tests from Harvard to test yourself how implicitly biased we are. It's very interesting to see. Categorization in our lives is so embedded in our society that we can see that in many different aspects. And here is a nice example of how categorization plays, how important is categorization in our everyday life, in our societies, and how it shapes our behavior, and how it can potentially lead to dehumanization. What all these groups, societies have in common, societies that live in different historic times and also in different geographic regions. What they have in common is that they define themselves as the people, as the real humans, and very often this type of definition is in contrast with people who are not belonging to their own group, so essentially non-human individuals. So there is really embedded in our society a form of categorization that differentiate people, human beings who are worth interacting with in a friendly way, with non-humans who can be treated as enemies and towards whom we can be aggressive and violent. So we wanted to test whether this type of categorization is embedded in our nature, so to speak, and whether we differentiate on individuals on the basis of very simple cues, and how this categorization affect cooperation. So we ran a study on children, on 3 to 10 years old children, and on adults, where we analyzed how individuals cooperated in groups of different composition. We modified the composition of the group participants were in using avatars. You can see here some examples. So we had avatars that were different from one another on the basis of the t-shirt color and also on the type of recreational activity, whether they liked, for example, to watch movies or whether they liked going out and playing sport. And then we assign participants in groups of different composition. Heterogeneous groups is the group on the extreme right of the screen, where all the individuals are different in terms of color and recreational activity, and homogeneous groups are all similar. And what we found was that all participants, children and adults, had a preference for their own group, so they were biased in favor of their own group at the expenses of other groups. But cooperation in children was not affected by group composition. On the contrary, okay, here it is. On the contrary, we found much more cooperation when adults were in homogeneous groups than they were when they were in heterogeneous group, which means supporting the social categorization hypothesis that we tend to be more cooperative towards individuals that we recognize as being similar to ourselves, and less so when we are in groups composed of individuals that are more different from ourselves. So what are the basis of this categorization and these biases in the fact that we treat better individuals who we recognize as similar to ourselves and different from instead we treat more aggressively or violently individuals who don't belong to our groups. One of the hypotheses, and this is highly debated as pretty much anything in science, is that warfare is a common feature of our evolutionary history, that humans have human ancestors have faced a prolonged period of warfare that has basically shaped our behavior and the way we behave towards group members and towards other groups. This has led to some important evolved traits. The first one is that we have a natural or an evolved tendency to categorize individuals according to very broad categories to differentiate them between friends and foes. In a competitive environment, you clearly need to collaborate with friends, so you need to recognize them, and you need to avoid as much as possible your enemies. It led to an evolved tendency to fear individuals who belong to other groups. This is what fear of outgroup means. And it may also lead to the evolution of increased cooperation within the group, in-group cooperation, when we are competing with other groups. Why is that so? It's because, theory says, when we are in groups and when we are competing with other groups over access to resources, if groups collaborate with group members or groups are composed of individuals that are very cooperative with other group members, these cooperative groups will outperform less cooperative groups, and so they will win conflicts with these groups and will gain access to resources. So cooperation with members of your own group is beneficial over evolutionary time. We wanted to test this hypothesis by running a study in children, 3 to 10 years old children. We grouped children in simple groups of 4 individuals. You can see a picture here with Laetitia Maréchal, with whom I ran the study. So children were in these groups, and they were playing a simple game that measured their cooperation towards other group members. We played 3 rounds of the game, and each children had to play either a competitive game where we told children that they were playing this game and there was another group with whom they were competing. We didn't tell them what type of competition was and what the competition or the outcome of the competition was going to be based on. We just told them there was a competition involved with another group, and we tested whether telling them that there was a competition elicited growing or increased cooperation as predicted by theory. And what we found was exactly that. We found that children across the 3 rounds were cooperating more frequently, this is the green bar, in the 3 rounds than when they were in the control condition. Cooperation was measured with the exchange of star stickers, so a very simple experimental game. But it proved that the mere presence of a potential outgroup that was threatening the group participants were in elicited cooperation, suggesting that really between group competition is a potential driver of in-group cooperation. Okay, so I think I've addressed the first question, that cooperation and competition can occur at the same time, as we have just seen. Individuals can be cooperative with members of their own group at the same time as competing with other groups. Now I'll try to address the second question, and whether humans can be considered uniquely aggressive in our evolutionary tree, or whether we share similar violent traits with our closest relatives. And relatively recently, there was a paper by Gomez and colleague which tested violence in a large range of species, not just humans, not just primates, so our closest relatives, monkeys, apes, lemurs, and so on, but in many different mammals and vertebrates. And what you can see on the graph on the right is what they found. Now, there are a large number of complex terms. These are different ways in which we can group mammals and vertebrates. But what is really relevant for us is that, according to Gomez, primates, so the group of mammals that include humans, apes, and monkeys, seems to be more violent than what you would expect simply based on our evolutionary history. So it looks like our group, the group we belong to, is more violent than other species and than what you would expect from looking simply at our evolutionary history. So suggesting that somehow primates are a violent group of animals. But in fact, when you look at other species, including non-primate species, you see that lethal violence is common in various species. Ants, for example, perform something that is very similar to human warfare. They have soldiers who engage in war, and so they fight with other groups much more than some other species. Mongoose, some carnivore species, wolves as well, quite regularly fight with other groups and can potentially kill members of other groups. Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, also perform something similar to war, or at least very ancestral types of war, when they enter the territory of neighbor communities and try to find isolated individuals and kill them. And in a study that we have under review, we also found that crested macaques, these are the black macaque species that lives in an island of Indonesia called, Sulawesi. They also display lethal violence. But interestingly, in this species, we observe females more commonly to be the actor and the target of violence instead of males, while in humans, for example, and in chimpanzees, males are the more usually the more frequent actor and target of lethal violence. So let me make a quick summary of what I just said. So there is extensive evidence that social categorization affects the type of social interactions. Whether we categorize individuals as friendly or non-friendly affects, of course, the nature of our social interactions. Whether we, the way we consider other individuals as similar to ourselves or different to ourselves affects how we behave towards them. We tend to be more friendly towards individuals who we consider similar to ourselves, and we tend to be more aggressive, or at least to avoid individuals who are more different to ourselves. And these are clearly the basic biological and evolutionary roots of prejudice and racism. We can also say that cooperation and aggression are two intertwined phenomena. So we cannot see cooperation and friendly behavior more generally as in opposition or in contrast to aggression. Clearly, cooperation and aggression have different functions and different costs and benefits for individuals. But as I showed you earlier, sometimes they may occur at the same time. We can equally be and simultaneously be very cooperative, usually towards members of our own group, and very aggressive or competitive, more frequently towards individuals of other groups. Another important conclusive remark is that it seems very likely, although this is debated, that a propensity to be aggressive towards individuals belonging to other groups is deeply rooted in our evolutionary past, so that our violent nature somehow is is at least to some extent affected by our evolution. Of course, humans, cultural, social norms and culture affects our behavior very much, and we know that social norms affect social interaction extensively. So, because I talked about aggression, I would like to finish with something more optimistic, because clearly social norms can play a role, a positive role on our society, and we can use our tendency to adhere to follow social norms to increase cohesion, to increase inclusivity, and to increase fairness. And a study by Nisdale and Lawson shows exactly that. Shows that when school apply norms for inclusivity, fairness, and kindness, then there is a significant increase, as you can see in the bottom line in this graph. There is a significant increase for a positive attitude towards individuals who belong to our own group as well as to other groups. So we might have an evolved propensity to fear members of other groups, or to be competitive and aggressive towards members of other groups. But this type of fear and competition and aggression is only elicited under specific ecological conditions, and can be controlled by social norms that are a key part of our society. And with this, I thank you for your attention, and I am happy to answer any question. If you have any, you can type those in the chat, or if everything is clear, then thank you very much for listening.